Hey everybody, my name is Jeff Koshin West. Welcome to ITB Sunday School. It is May 24th. We are focusing on today, in today's Sunday School, we're focusing on identifying emotions, hearing needs, and reflective listening. In the past, the past couple weeks, we had a Sunday School where we talked about why emotions are important, why emotionality can be helpful. And today we're going to kind of go into this a little bit more. And there was some conversation about, well, how do we maybe get a little bit more into emotions and what their value is and all that jazz along the way. And we want to figure out a little bit more about how do we go about becoming more emotionally intelligent. That was a big question that came up about, well, yeah, emotions are great. We hear you that these emotions are important. We see why they're valuable, and we see why emotional awareness is valuable, but how do you build emotional awareness? So this is a pretty important question. So we wanted to make sure we gave some options for you to play with if you are interested in that. So our focus will be today, it will be investigating some suggestions about from ITB and the inspirations of ITB on how to identify certain emotions, how to work with those emotions, how to hear needs, because needs are connected to emotional experiences and things along those lines. And then also how to do some reflective listening, not only in interacting with another human, but also kind of hearing ourselves and kind of reflective listening, as maybe schizophrenic as it sounds, reflective listening with ourselves and creating some grounds for emotional awareness and becoming more emotionally aware and increasing our emotional intelligence. So we're going to start at a relatively beginner level. Because we don't want to assume anybody has, a certain amount of training prior to. So we're going to start with some really basic stuff. And so if you consider yourself a little bit more emotionally literate, bear with us for a little while, and we will get into some heavier stuff or some more quote unquote advanced stuff as we go along. But we really want to create some foundation to understand how we build these relationships to the emotions and what the point of that is. So we'll just go ahead and jump right on in. So our first up question is our first interest is identifying emotions, and what do we do and how do we do that? And really we got to start with, why do we do that? Well, in ITB, the why of doing that is so we in ITB, we take the perspective and we honor emotions as being another part of our sensory system, sensory system that's a part of our human experience. So just like our five senses, smell, touch, taste, all that stuff, just like those characters, the emotions are a part of that sensory experience of reality. It's a part of how the human brain and the whole human body interprets what's happening in reality, what's happening both in the external world as well as the internal world. And emotions are super duper important for us humans, because they are really, really linked to different stress responses and fight or flight and different things along those lines. Those are probably the origins of why emotions became so darn potent in creatures on this planet, including human beings. And so what we're noticing is that emotions are important for, when it comes to ITB, emotions are important for not only interpretation of reality and greater self-awareness, but with that interpretation of reality and greater self-awareness comes a greater opportunity to go through the process of recovery and also to answer the call of personal transformation. So we have found, along with so many others, that the greater our emotional awareness, the greater our emotional intelligence, the greater our ability to navigate the emotional territories of our human experience, the greater our ability to do those things, the higher the probability is that we're going to be able to recover from trauma, integrate those experiences, and benefit from those experiences in a way that's going to contribute to our wisdom, to our insight, to our human preservation and the preservation of others. So emotions are pretty darn important, and that's kind of why we pay attention to those characters. And if we're going to take this great adventure of recovery from our traumas and integration of our traumas and look into the future of how do we become more aware of our life, thus transform and evolve and take the journey up the spiral, then there's going to be this question of what's up with our emotions and how do our emotions play and all that jazz. So starting off, our best suggestion to start with is consider emotions an inherent part of our body experience. So what we first want to do is recognize that the emotional experience is very, very tied to the physical body. So sensory experience. So the sensation and the emotions are very, very intertwined, especially the sensations and emotions that are deeply associated with our fight or flight, our different stress responses. So fight or flight is one that most of us hear about. Fight, flight, freeze responses and things along those lines. They have a very, very, very strong emotional content that goes along with them. In order to fight, we need rage, not just anger, but rage. In order to fight a big monster or an animal that might be wanting to eat us that is much stronger than us, in order to fight that, we need rage to be in that experience in order to fight and survive that experience. If we're going to run away, which is the flight part of fight or flight, if we're going to run away, we're going to need not just fear, but we need some terror. We need to be terrified in order to run as intensely as we can. And that what we find is that those two extremes of the fight or flight experience of rage and terror, they come and they have a whole bunch of biochemical tracers and whole bunch of biochemical material that helps us get through those experiences and get through those experiences so we can survive. The other one, fight, flight, freeze, not many people know about freeze, but and don't include it oftentimes, but it's becoming more and more a part of conversation when it comes to stress response and emotional intelligence, and especially trauma. The freeze response is associated with the kind of almost the turning off. Most of us would know it as playing possum or playing dead or something along those lines. In the schema of this, if I'm being attacked by a monster, in that scheme of being attacked by a beast or something like that, and maybe either I'm going to fight that beast or I'm going to run away from that beast. We also have the option of playing dead. And so when we play dead, it is emotionless. So it's kind of like a dissociative experience. It's almost like, but not as extreme. It's more along the lines of we go numb. We kind of just, we fall and we go numb and we go limp and we are in a kind of emotionally flat line type of a space. If it goes on too long, we can go into dissociative experiences. We can go into fold responses, which is much worse. But as for the most part, we're going to stick with fight, flight, and freeze. And those are pretty deep and strong emotional charges. So that's most likely where we got this inlay of emotional experience in the history of evolution. It's probably one of those things why it still sticks around. And so emotions and sensation in the body are deeply rooted to each other. And so if we're going to investigate emotion, we find it best to start with a bodily experience or body sensations. So we often do a lot of this work with imagination. So if you're going to go along with this process of becoming emotionally aware, you're going to be using a lot of emotion. You're going to be using a lot of uses of your memory. You're going to be using a lot of the activity of mental exercises in order to kind of get yourself in touch with some of that material. So remember that we're going to be using emotion a lot we're going to be using imagination a lot as we go forwards with a lot of this emotional awareness conversation. The other thing I cannot stress enough, and the best suggestion I can make to you as we go along here, is to seriously consider, and it's almost an imperative to me, at least personally, you really ought to have some type of journal for this stuff, something to write down your exploration, something to document how you're going through this process. I'm not going to kid you, this is a complex type of a thing for the majority of us. Emotions are not super duper simple. So if you're going to start investigating emotion, and especially emotions that are kind of veiled or emotions that are not common in your emotional linguistics or emotional intelligence, There's going to be complexities. There's going to be muddiness. There's going to be kind of like this teasing apart of things, kind of getting to the details and pulling apart details and pulling apart interconnectedness and things along those lines. So we strongly suggest you have some type of journal or something to write down a lot of your exploration. Primarily because it's darn confusing as you go forwards, and the documentation can be super helpful. Moreover, as you progress through the months and hopefully years of this type of exploration, you'll be able to go back and reference stuff. You'll be able to reference the old entries you had into this document or into this journal, and you'll get to see what these things look like. Literally, you can get into, you can separate this journal up into sections of like anger, happiness, or anger, enjoyment, sadness, fear, depression. You can split up a journal into those pieces. I've gone as far as having, I use a lot of these, what's it called, yellow legal pads, and a lot of the things that I do for my own work. So you can literally just label each one of these different yellow legal pads or small journals, and you can label them as like specific emotions as you explore those specific emotions. I highly suggest you get organized in relationship to it, because that type of organization helps with your personal experience internally, and it creates an opportunity for, once again, for you to document these things, for you to reflect on these things, for you to explore them a little bit more nuanced. It creates an opportunity for you to take that material and bring it to someone like me, who's a coach for ITB and a guide as far as that's concerned, or bring it to your counselor, your psychotherapist, another coach that you work with. This stuff can be super duper helpful in relationship to growing as you, or super duper helpful as far as your growth process and maintaining some type of perspective on where you've come from. So having a journal is super duper important when it comes to this material. So I can't suggest this enough. So starting out with body sensations, let's talk a little bit about how do I get in touch with and identifying emotions. Things that can also be helpful are lists of emotions. I would suggest doing an internet search and seeing if you can find kind of like a list of different emotions. Now, there's been a lot of exploration of emotions in psychotherapy, and since positive psychology has really kicked in the late 90s, there's been a lot of exploration of mapping emotions and what emotions look like, and trying to identify what emotions link into each other and how those play out. So I would find one of my favorite ones is the color wheel of emotions. Like you'll have these in the very closer center of the color wheel. You have like these the more kind of larger, broader emotions, the larger umbrella emotions, and then out from there you have like these nuanced emotions that go along with those heavier emotions, or those more general type of emotions. Like to give you an example, if we're talking about the umbrella of anger, underneath the umbrella of anger is frustration, irritation, rage, confusion, and agitation. Different types of flavors of anger. Okay, from relatively mild anger, maybe being slightly put off, to intense versions of anger, which may be intense resentment, intense rage. So kind of getting a list of emotions can be really helpful. One of my favorite contributors to this is, and which we are inspired, I am inspired, and ITB pulls a fair bit from, is from a gentleman by the name of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. He created something called nonviolent communication. If you want to get involved with that community, I can't suggest it enough. Spending time kind of getting to know emotions, listing emotions is super important as far as them. We're also going to be heading in the direction of some of that material that Rosenberg suggests about deepening our emotional awareness and understanding where emotions kind of come from. So having a list of emotions can be really, really darn helpful. And that we'll kind of reference that a little bit later. So if you want to find yourself a list of emotions, that can be super duper helpful. So you can bring that along and use that as you like. So having a list of emotions is pretty darn important. So here we go. So if I'm feeling a physical sensation, so what we want to do is we want to approach a physical sensation to an emotion. So let's pay attention. We can do the imagination of the last time you were angry or afraid. Okay, angry or scared, angry or afraid. Last time you got pissed off, last time you got very scared. Let's treat these as separate things, because a lot of people talk about, fear creates anger, or anger it creates fear, something along those lines. We're going to kind of tease these apart. As far as our philosophical orientation is concerned, these type of emotions, they arise together. They don't always, there's not a clear evolution of them. Like there's not a clear evolution of fear becomes anger all the time, or vice versa. Anger always becomes fear, or sad becomes fear, and then that sadness and fear becomes anger. That type of thing doesn't seem to be holding up as far as all that's concerned. If you feel that's true, that's perfectly fine. The way we talk about it in ITB is those emotions kind of arise. They're kind of powerhouses of emotions. They're very, very large umbrellas of emotion that arise, and that sadness, fear, and anger can arise, and they definitely do relate to each other, but we don't see them as giving birth to each other. We see them as kind of a part of a storyline of these kind of umbrella emotions. And so we want to kind of recognize them, and we want to invite you to entertain this idea that they are not giving birth to each other. They're just partners. They're umbrellas. They're whole spheres of emotional content that have a lot of nuances and have mellow portions of them and extreme portions of them. So within sadness, within fear, within anger, there's always a kind of a mellow version, and there's definitely an extreme version. So in sadness, you might feel, a little bit of melancholy. And the worst kind of sadness is you're just in deep woe and sorrow and depleted and defeated, hopeless even. So we want to kind of keep in mind that these major umbrellas of emotion are large and have great nuance within them. They don't kind of give birth to each other. They kind of arise around each other. We do want to recognize that they have within each one of those large umbrellas, there are a very light version as well as a very extreme version, or a very mellow light version, and a very extreme and heavy version. And we want to kind of honor that reality. And so we want to kind of play with that experience a little bit. And we don't want to confuse that one gives birth to the other. We just don't seem to really notice that to be true all the time. So what we also want to do beyond that is we want to identify a physical sensation that may go with sadness. So pick one of these characters: sadness, fear, anger. Pick one, and we'll kind of sit with it for a second. So as we start with this, let's think of the last time you felt angry about something. There doesn't seem to be a shortage of these emotions: anger, fear, and sadness in the world. And if anger doesn't blow your hair back right now, if anger is a little bit difficult for you to make contact with right now, that's perfectly fine. Just pick another one and think of, maybe fear is really big in your life right now. Maybe sadness is really big in your life right now. Just pick an emotion right now that you can have regular connection to. So as you feel into that emotion, or into that sensation of that emotion, where does that live in your body? These are kind of rudimentary practices here. As you feel this fear, as you feel this anger, as you feel this sadness, what does it feel like in your body? Where does it feel like it's in your body? And if it doesn't feel like it's in your body, is it around your body? Is it behind you? Is it kind of sitting over one area? Is it by, one shoulder or another? Or is it actually sitting outside of your body? Maybe it's in front of you here. Maybe it's inside of your actual physical body. So we want to kind of get a body awareness to it because of the history and the fact of the physiology of the stress response and emotionality. We want to kind of bring that physical experience into this conversation. We want to kind of start here. This is a really strong suggestion we make. So as you're feeling that anger and you want to feel what that anger feels like in your body, where do you sense it? And wherever you're sensing it, let's say as you're feeling this fear, you may feel it in your shoulders or in your arms. You may feel it in your tummy. As you're feeling it there, give it some attention. We're just going to kind of sit with it for a second. And as we sit with it, notice what it does to your body. Notice kind of what your system does when you feel that fear, okay? Wherever you're feeling it in your body. And as you feel that sensation, just kind of get a sense of it and feel and check in with some of the other senses. Does it seem auditorily, does that fear or that anger, that emotion, wherever it is, does it feel very loud, or does it feel kind of muted? Does it feel very hot, or does it feel very cold? Does it feel like it's very active and moving, or does it feel very like flat? Does it feel like it wants to pull inwards or doesn't want to push out? So we want to start to feel some of the other nuances of this experience, of this emotion. And we're doing this because we want to get to know something. We want to get to know this emotion, and we want to know how it lives in our body. Because there's oftentimes, especially in today's culture, there's a lot of situations where we'll get the physical responses and we'll kind of not pay attention to them and just barrel forwards. And that causes a lot of stress in the body. That causes a lot of stress in the psyche. This causes a lot of agitation in the body-mind experience. So in the beginning of this work, we oftentimes suggest just getting to know what is it like to be in the experience of feeling the emotion of what's alive in your body. So as we sit with this, definitely take some time to get a feel for that. And then we oftentimes suggest having that list of emotions in front of you. So say what you're feeling right now, the emotion you're focusing on is a fear, part of the fear category of emotion. And as you look at the words associated with a fear category, the most extreme version of the fear is terror, right? So first off, we can say, does this feel like terror? Does it feel as big and as bright and as intense as terror? And kind of just feel into it. Now, if your answer is yes, then great. What nicely done. Good, you found it. And remember that what we're interested in doing at this step, once we kind of feel where this emotion is sitting in our body, we want to kind of get a sense of like, is it an extreme version, or is it kind of the mellow version, or is it in the middle? And so we want to start to pay attention to the nuance of that category of emotion. So if you're feeling fear, we start with feeling that fear, scanning our body, thinking of the last time we were afraid, feeling that in our body, and then getting a sense for, was I terrified, or was I just a little bit worried and concerned? Was I a little bit confused and worried? Was I more upset? Was I kind of frustrated and more angry and getting a little bit more agitated? Was I moving a little bit more towards that terror? Like, what does that look like for you? I look a little. Am I a little bit afraid? A little bit worried? Am I a little bit scared? I'm starting to feel uncertain. Starting to feel at risk, and compared to I am terrified. So we kind of want to feel for that gauge, because that can tell us a deep story about what to do and where to go from there. So getting some of this sense of nuance in relationship to this emotional information can be super duper helpful for regulating and working with those emotions and not becoming possessed by them. So as we're sitting with this fear, we kind of feel it in our body wherever it is. We start to connect some of our other senses with it. How bright is it? How dark is it? Is it hot or cold, or none of the above? Is it very active or not active? Is it very tight or is it very loose and floaty? And what color is it? Does it even have a color? Does it have a sound? And so we want to kind of get some sense of that bodily sensory experience of that emotion. And then we want to push into a little bit farther and ask a little bit more of a complex question, which is, what are the nuances that I'm kind of having with that? And having that list of word emotions having to do with this fear can be helpful in telling you the story of like, was I just a little bit worried, or was I full on felt at risk and violated and felt like I was going to die? So we want to kind of get a real sense for that feeling, for what those nuances are. Nuances, kind of getting familiar with these nuances, as I said, kind of helps with giving us a opportunity to kind of decide how to relate to that emotion and what to do with that emotion, and how we need to cope with those things. If we're feeling a medium to low amount of nuance, let's say we're a little bit worried, we're a little bit concerned, we may not have to do a whole lot of coping mechanisms or self-care for that kind of emotional content. But as we go from a medium fear to more extreme fear, that increases the probability of us being possessed by that and not being able to make solid decisions, not listening to our whole body and our whole wisdom experience. And that starts to put us in a category where we may do some really dangerous stuff. All right. And if it's extreme enough and uncomfortable enough, we may do something worse with it. We may disown it and suggest we don't feel that fear and terror. We disconnect from that fear and terror, and we do that disconnection usually through some kind of repressive practice. Okay, so one of the things that we really want to be careful of is not denying an emotional kind of a content. We have found, we meaning the human potential community, myself and the human potential community, and the community having to do with exploring what it means to be human. What we have found is that when human beings kind of deny emotions or deny an experience of reality inside of them, when they deny it, it seems to have heavy repercussions in the psyche. It's kind of a subtle denial of self, subtle denial of what's going on for them. And it gets really bad when they're feeling very strong emotions, very intense emotions, maybe the more extreme nuanced portion of the emotions. And they deny those things even more. And at that point in time, the problem with that is that they're denying some of the red flag markers that their body is trying to tell the psyche about. So a lot of these more extreme portions of the emotional spectrum are very much about safety, of life, of preserving our safety, preserving our life. And those extreme versions wave a really big red flag to tell us that something's wrong in our reality, that we're perceiving something off in our reality, usually dangerous or sinister, or something that's going to be a risk to us. So when we start to deny that emotional content, we kind of decrease our ability to respond to violations, our ability to respond to being put at risk. We start to deny our ability to recognize that we are taken advantage of, or we're in trouble, or we're not safe anymore. And when the more we deny those extreme red flags from our emotional content, the more we deny those things, the less in touch with reality it seems us humans are. And the more we're in touch with receiving that material, what we use the phrase in ITB of the more we make room in our hearts for those emotions, the whole spectrum of emotions, the more we do that, the more in touch with reality we are. So since emotion is so linked to stress response in the history of creatures on this planet, since they're so linked, when we start to deny those red flags, we're kind of denying the fact that we're alive. We're kind of denying that we are something that's precious and something that needs to be taken care of. We're denying parts of our humanity. We're denying the fact that we are impacted by things. And this causes a lot of agitation in the psyche. This causes a lot of confusion in the psyche. This causes a real lack of self-awareness, causes a real lack of environmental awareness. And since I'm denying those signs in myself, that also oftentimes makes it difficult for me to see it in other people. So if I'm really good at denying my fear, denying my anger, and denying my sadness, it may actually make it really difficult for me to interpret that another person is feeling those things when they're not verbally telling us. And even if we are if we are being verbally told, we may actually deny it anyhow. This is an unfortunate situation. So we do primarily focus, we are very interested in doing this emotional work because it does bring us into deeper relationship to reality. Thus the trauma recovery, thus the contribution it makes to personal transformation and evolution as a human being. So for our primary, so our interest is to make sure that we start to wake up to our emotional content. As we start to become more and more aware of our emotional content and what's going on with the emotional spectrum, with these categories, these pillars, these umbrellas of emotion, sadness, fear, anger, as we start to notice the nuances of them, we then want to take it to another step. So the next phase, the next practice we suggest is kind of asking this question of kind of like a directional type of a directionality conversation with the emotions, which is what's inside of the emotion, or what's behind the emotion, or what's underneath the emotion. So if you were to show up to a class where I was teaching and we were talking about this, I would say something along the lines of, as you feel this emotion, can you identify if there's something inside, behind, or underneath that emotional material? And I give you these, we offer these three phrases, these three options, because that's how people have shown us how humans translate emotions these days. So not everybody says emotions have something inside of them. Some people say emotions have something behind them or underneath them. So however you identify that experience, we do suggest you explore all three of them, because there's a high likelihood that not every aspect of you translates emotion in the same way. What we do suggest is that you kind of pick one and run with it. So if you're feeling this fear and you find out that the fear that's surfacing is not an extreme fear, maybe it's a medium fear where it's making you feel concerned and a little unsafe, we would then say, all right, as you sit with that sense of, you know, being unsafe and insecure and not secure, not made safe, and a little bit worried, as you sit with that, is there anything inside of those emotions? Is there anything around those emotions? Is there anything underneath those emotions? And this creates kind of this kind of psychological, neurological, verbal vision to occur, and investigation into the deeper storylines and beliefs in relating to those emotions. So this is a deeper story. We're getting into the more complex kind of storyline that's going on. We're getting into more complexities of this emotional awareness and this emotional investigation. So what we hope to occur is we do step, quote unquote, let's call it just step one. This step one of connecting body sensations with emotion. We think of a memory where we felt a certain thing, and we feel the physical sensations of it, and we feel some of the emotional qualities to it, and we feel the emotional quality to it. We give it some names, we name it, we try and locate it, we work with it, we define it in a sensory type of a context of what does it sound like, what does it look like, what is it heavy, is it light, is it active, is it not, is it hot, is it cold? We kind of put it into context of body descriptors. We then move into getting into the nuances of the extremity, or of the extremeness or mellowness of that emotional, the nuances of the emotion. So if I'm having a memory that is a sad memory, how intense is that memory? Is it kind of not so intense? Is it just a little bit of sadness, or is it like an intense sadness? And so we start to identify, we take our bodily sensation and naming and kind of understanding the deeper, vivid the emotional sensory experience around the emotion. We then bring that to nuance and terms and words, so we can get a sense of the nuance, how extreme or how mellow it is. Kind of get a sense for that, and we play with the words and we kind of figure out where that's at. And then we start to investigate what's going on, what's around, or what's up with that emotional experience, with that nuanced emotional term. And we want to find out what's the story inside of it, what's the story underneath it, and what's the story behind it. What we find is that emotions have a lot of layers to them. This is where we oftentimes see the old euphemism, or the old analogy of emotions being like onions. You know, you just peel the layers and you see deeper and deeper into the story. And we want to be mindful of what is the story as we start to remove those layers, as we start to push into what's underneath, behind, or inside of any given emotion. We want to kind of get a little bit more understanding of that. And this starts to give us a lot more of an understanding of whether we ought to be, you know, what we ought to do with the emotion. Essentially, it gives us some content and some direction about, am I having this emotion because of the data that's in front of me and what I'm seeing, or am I having this emotion because this thing that's occurring in front of me is a part of my past and a part of an injury? So if we do a quick example of this, let's say that you see, let's pretend you have the image, or you witness this event in the general population. You're maybe out in public and you see a mother chastising a child, okay? And that mother is kind of verbally angry and is acting in a physically angry way, kind of threatening to the child, yelling down at the child, and kind of saying some rough stuff to that child. So let's pretend this is the scene that you're witnessing. So as you witness it, you may feel certain emotions. There may be a sadness, there may be a fear, there may be an anger that comes up. So whatever emotion surfaces, if we're playing the game of learning from our emotions and becoming more aware of our emotions, we would play the game of, as that emotion arises, what's some of the sensory signifiers of it? So some of the sensory signifiers are temperature. Is it tight? Is it tight or loose? Is it active or mellow? What part of the body is it in, or is it outside of the body? What temperature is it? Things along those lines. Is it loud? Is it soft? And so we would start with that bodily sensation experience. We would say if let's say it's anger that you're experiencing, the anger feels like this, it's this temperature, it's this bright, it's this kind of tension, this is where it's located in my body. And we kind of get, you know, those out of the way. We kind of understand what's going on, how is it alive inside of us. And then we kind of look at the nuances of it. Like, if is this a little bit of anger? Am I kind of irritated at this situation? Or am I wicked irritated at this situation? Am I really angry about this? Is this is this scene enraging me? Or am I just kind of like, it sucks, but you know, that's what's going on. And so we kind of get a nuance of that and get a feel for that. And then we look inside of that experience, inside of that, the nuanced experience, and wherever the nuance of that experience arises, whether it's a kind of mellow, middle, or extreme, we kind of get a sense for that and look at it and say, all right, what is there anything inside of this? Is there a storyline inside of this? What does this remind me of? This is bringing memories up of something. Does this kick up my belief about how parenting should occur? Does this agitate my personal memories of my trauma and when my parents yelled at me? And so we want to kind of get at that story. All right. We want to get at that belief. We want to get at what surrounding material lives with that emotion. Mostly because it gives us a deeper interpretation of who we are and what's happening for us, and how we should act in relationship, and if we should act, what action to be taken. So this can be really, really helpful in relationship to interpreting reality, because if I notice that I'm getting really angry because this scene reminds me of my own abuse from a parent or someone else, that maybe was bigger than me or whatever. If I start to feel this material, it can start to agitate my history. And instead of acting out of that history, I can say, all right, well, okay, this scene in front of me irritates the shit out of me because of I have this history, and it just kicking up my baggage. It's kicking up my agitation. Some people call that a trigger, or their baggage is coming up or something like that. A story is getting a charge or something like that. And so it's good to kind of recognize when you're getting triggered, when you're getting a charge come up, and remember that if that's happening, that's not how you need to engage the situation, even if you even should engage the situation. So what we hope to occur is for us to be so aware of when situations arise, emotional material arises, the nuance in the material is understood, and we also interpret why that emotional material is surfacing, whether it's just because I'm seeing the situation for what it is and being clear with it, and I should take action in relationship to it, or if I'm just really wrapped up in my history of that type of situation occurring in front of me. And so emotional awareness becomes just wonderfully important in relationship to making relationship to reality and making sure you're seeing reality clearly, because the person that is triggered is kind of caught in a charge about what they're seeing in front of them. They're not interpreting reality correctly. Okay. They are being really, really charged by material that's inside of them, and they're really feeling that emotion strongly. And they may misinterpret what's in front of them completely. And if they take action, that action is not most likely because of what's in front of them. It's because of what it reminds them of. So if they have a history of being abused in this way, being talked to in this way, maybe being shamed in a certain way, and having a parent come down on them really hard, if they have a whole lot of that material, they could just simply see a parent holding a boundary with a kid and reaffirming a boundary with a kid that's struggling with some certain material. And instead of seeing a parent doing what they're supposed to be doing, they see a tyrant parent attacking a kid. Okay. And they've got to stand up for that kid because they're not seeing the situation through the actual lens of the reality. They're seeing it through their trauma. And so when it comes to emotional awareness, this is another great gift that it gives us, is that it helps us kind of take the charge out of the emotional material. It helps us see when we are charged and when we are triggered, and then it teaches us what to kind of do with it. It helps us interpret and experience reality in a much more clean and clear way. So we want to be really kind of mindful of that whole experience, because if you're doing life out of the charges and the triggers of your history, you're not really doing life. You're just kind of recreating your past history. You're just recreating and having fights from your past, and you're not actually in the moment. You're not actually in the world. You're just acting out past the material in the waking world, in the real world. And that's not enlightened. That's not healthy. That's not going to be excuse me, that's not going to make for a healthy relationship with whoever you're making a relationship with. It's not going to make a fruitful relationship for you. And it really actually does turn into a prison for you if you can't tell. You're walking around triggered and agitated all the time, and you're just basically putting that in the world and working that out through whoever you make contact with. So we want to be kind of this is one of the primary reasons why we suggest emotional awareness, because it decreases the probability of that. So if you have emotional awareness and a trigger comes up, you can say, holy crap, watching this woman talk to her son, or maybe be a little bit forceful with her son about boundaries and about situations, kind of having a high tension thing. I'm noticing, some of my triggers with my parental experience, my damage with my parent coming up. Wow, that's kind of hitting me kind of hard as I see the situation. And I can say, all right, cool, I definitely need to pay attention to that material so I can have a little bit more of control in relationship to that emotion, and know that it's not allowed to kind of overtake me. I should not do life from that trigger. And it can create an opportunity for me to say, all right, that emotion and that trigger is real, but I can also see the situation for the real side. And if I notice a trigger coming up with what I'm witnessing, I need to err on the side of safety because I'm intoxicated by that emotional content. So I'm not seeing reality clearly. So I have to be careful about taking charge or wanting to control the scenario, because I'm probably drunk, intoxicated from the charge and the material that's going on. So we want to be really mindful of this, because as I'm charged, I'm drunk, and then I'm drunk doing things. And that's not a great way to do life. That's not a great way to stand up for clarity and honesty and intimacy. There is no intimacy when you're drunk and you're doing those things. When you're living out of a charge, there's very little intimacy going on, because you're acting through that charge rather than being with that human being. So this is one thing that we have to be really, really careful about, and we have to be self-governing about. This is really difficult to have other people help us out with, because nobody's inside here. Nobody's inside this experience. So when a charge comes up, our hope is that you recognize, oh shit, I'm feeling that real charge. I'm feeling that really intense emotion. That's really good. Thank you, body, for telling me I got this charge and this history. I'll have to work on that when I get home and do my journaling and do my shadow work, or bring it to my psychotherapist or coach or counselor. And then I can say, okay, well, as I witness this situation, I need to remember I'm maybe a little bit intoxicated from that damage that came up. So as I watch this, I need to really pay attention to the scenario going on and understand that I don't have all the data, and I need to be really careful about thinking I should do something or not do something. So this is what we hope happens, is that we recognize the human experience going on. We recognize when we have a trigger come up, and then act accordingly. This is some of the power of emotional awareness and things along those lines. So we're going to go ahead and stop there, I think. We're going to create an opportunity for that to be the beginning conversation. We'll come back to do more with this, but I'm going to suggest you take this home. I'm going to suggest you take this into your world. And this is how we suggest you go through this emotional awareness process. So to recap really quickly, get yourself a journal, get yourself some place to start writing this material down and documenting this material. Find that for yourself. Get yourself a list of these different emotions. Once again, you can hop on, a search engine and find this kind of color wheel of emotions, or a list of emotions that are associated with sadness, fear, anger, even pleasant emotions, enjoyment, euphoria, and ecstasy, and pleasure, and things along those lines. I think they have those out there. And so as you do this, you want to pay attention to that list. You want to have a list of words that have emotions in them. And then you want to start with the memory, and you want to say, all right, how did I feel when X, I, Z happened? I'm going to think of this memory when I was sad. I'm going to think of this memory when I was angry. I'm going to think of this memory when I was afraid. As you think about that memory, we start with sensory material. How big is it? How active is it? How hot or cold is it? Is it loud or is it soft? Is it bright or is it kind of dull? And then where is it in my body? Is it outside of my body? Is it out here? Is it behind me a little bit? Is it off to my side? Or is it in my body? Is it in my feet? Is it in my chest? Is it in my hips? Is it just in one hip? Is it in my back right shoulder? Where does it live? So we're connecting the dots of the emotional, physical experience that's going on. From there, we move into the next phase, which is find out the nuance. This is where that list of emotions becomes very, very helpful. Pay attention to the list of emotions. Notice the nuance from very mellow, maybe a very light version of sadness, to a very extreme version of sadness, or anger, or fear, whatever emotion you're focusing on. And get to know that nuanced quality. And then when you actually start to sense what that nuanced quality is, you can also then start to look into what's inside of that nuanced emotion, what's behind that nuanced emotions, what's underneath the nuanced emotions. And this is an invitation to learn the story about the emotions. Okay, so you may have a belief, you may have a memory, you may have a storyline about how emotions are supposed to occur, or how that emotion is supposed to occur for your gender or your age, your economic structure, your intelligence level, whatever. You're going to have all this kind of weird stuff around that. But we want to kind of map that out and write it out and say, this is what's going on with that. And then we want to examine it. We want to examine it because we want to find out if it's real or not. All right. We want to find out if that's how we want to live in relationship to that emotion. So the final stroke is then looking at what you've written down, looking at the storyline, and saying, is this a way that I actually want to participate in the world? If you have a belief that because you're a good person, you should never feel sad. This is a very, very dangerous type of a belief system about your humanity. If you're a good person, you totally will feel sad. You totally can feel angry, and you totally can feel afraid. Good people, happy people, people who are bright and kind of, bubbly, the full spectrum of emotion is still available to you and is a part of that bubbliness, okay? And that a part of that positivity. So if you believe yourself to be a good person, a happy person, a bubbly person, a bright person, and you think you should never be sad, that is categorized as denying your sadness, denying your humanity, denying your fullness, okay? And that may seem right by some people's contexts, but by those who have come before you and those who are wise and intelligent in the realm of emotions and emotional awareness and social intelligence, what we find is that is a great flaw against you. That is a great, damage you're doing to yourself. And so in reflecting upon that belief, it may be really worthwhile to update it, examine the data and the information, and make the choice, hey, I can still be a bright, happy, jovial person and still feel sadness. That's normal. That's part of my humanity. Same thing goes for fear and anger. And this is a part of your wholeness. This is a part of your deep humanity, of your deep complex humanity, and we want to make room for those guys. If you have a what's it called? If you have a belief system that's flawed, you totally have the right to change it. You don't need some big event to change that belief. If you believe that, here's one that comes up a lot in the men's work. If you have a belief that men are not supposed to feel fear, or men are not supposed to feel sadness, they're just supposed to be tough or something along those lines, and anger is a connection to toughness, man, I'm telling you right now, modify that, okay? Investigate that and change that, because a lot of the suggestions that men are not supposed to feel sad or afraid are a complete denial of our humanity. To suggest that if you feel sadness or scared, that you're less of a man is completely untrue. It's a complete falsehood. All right. It has nothing to do with deep wisdom. It has nothing to do with deep masculinity. It has nothing to do with deep humanity. Okay. You may talk about wanting to be a man. You may talk about really embodying your masculinity and being a strong male. But understand that your strong maleness is associated with the fact that you're a damn human. And so if you're going to investigate this thing called masculinity or manhood or being a man, there has to be, and if you want to do that in an honest way, if you want to do that in a full way, if you want to do that in a thoughtful, open-minded type of a way, you have to include your humanity, because you're human before you are a gender. You're human before you decide that you're this man or that man or a tough guy or something along those lines. So we want to really, really, really be mindful that your humanity is so dynamic that we don't want to just put ourselves in this little box of a man is supposed to feel and do like this, and women do the emotions. That's completely incorrect, and it's completely in denial of your humanity and your wholeness. So that's a belief that's extremely dangerous to the human being that's participating in it. All right. And we want to be mindful that that belief probably has trauma, probably has other education around it, poor education. And we want to reflect on that stuff. We want to find out where we learned that stuff, who was teaching us that, where that came from. And we have to kind of do that work on that material. And that can give us the freedom we're looking for. That can give us the connection we're looking for. So as we kind of investigate these emotions and become more emotionally aware, the evolution of emotional awareness is the ability to recognize the nuance of emotion and then what is tied to that nuance of emotion. If I'm feeling that nuanced emotion, it's because of XYZ experiences. I know my history in relationship to it, and I can make a conscious choice based off of the situation, not off of just the stories. Because the majority of the time, what we have found in ITB over and over and over and over again is that a lot of the beliefs, a lot of the ideals, a lot of the storylines that are around this emotional content, they're false, they're off, they're warped. Okay. Sometimes they're flat out fabrications. And the reason they're that way is because a young person who didn't have the whole story, who was under a certain amount of intense stress, was probably experiencing some type of neglect and abuse. Because of that standard, this young person poorly interpreted the reality of the situation. Or that young person was educated by a not so educated adult. And so what we want to do is we want to be really, really, really mindful that when we reflect on these nuances and reflect on those stories, we do that with great care and actually a team. I would highly suggest you bring this to your counselor, a coach, a men's group, what we do at ITB. Really discover what these beliefs are and if these beliefs are actually valid, if these stories are actually true, and if these fabrications and perspectives are actually what you want to live. And that takes an incredible act of courage. If you want to be, if you're looking to be a man and be courageous and be just and be powerful and be a man of your word, this is how you do it, quite honestly. Most men don't understand that this is the actual work that needs to be done in order to fully embody your awesomeness. Okay. So if you identify as being a male, if you identify as being a male and you want to really have that experience of your feeling your full manhood, you really have to feel your full humanity. And that means you have to really get into this experience of, I'm an emotional human being like every other creature on this planet. I'm an emotional creature just like every other creature on this planet, and I need to be aware of what to do with those emotions and how to deal with my triggers and how to unpack and unwind really poor held beliefs around emotional material. This is a lot of work. This is an incredible, courageous act. It is wicked painful, okay? It is very uncomfortable on a regular basis. If you go in this direction, you will feel dumb, you'll feel weak, you'll feel inept, and it doesn't matter who you are, quote unquote, male or female, or however you want to identify. Every human being, as they go towards this material of trying to understand emotionality and becoming closer and closer and more connected to their emotions, they inevitably feel, like I said, weak. They feel inept. They feel it's very messy. They oftentimes feel lost a lot of times. And this is why you ought to have a partner and have a pal and have somebody to help you out through that process. And that's because it's an act of vulnerability. And we all know that vulnerability, well, hopefully we all will come to know, that vulnerability is some of the greatest power we'll ever hold in our hands. And the more we get comfortable with our vulnerability, the more connected we are with life, the more juicy life is, the more amazing our relationships are, and the higher probability for our success in life, however we gauge it, our success in life actually comes to fruition. So this is our suggestion from ITB. Once again, my name is Jeff Koshin West. I'm founder of Integral Transformative Bodywork. This is our ITB Sunday School for May 24th. We didn't get into some of the other material, but we'll definitely get into some of the other material in the future. I've left you with plenty to do. So please investigate this concept of emotional awareness and what to do with it, and IDing emotions and playing with emotions this way. Get yourself a list of emotions, get yourself a journal or 10, and get to work. All right, this is the work that's going to change the world. No amount of money will do this for you. No amount of relationships will do this for you. No amount of successful jobs will do this to you. No amount of children will do this to you. You have to do this on your own, and it's something you have to build for yourself. Woo! It's not a weekend retreat. It's not even a month-long practice. This is a lifetime bit of work, all right? So you want to commit to this. You want to know that you want to commit to this at least 2 or 3 years of really investigating this stuff. And if you're not investigating on a regular basis, you're looking at 5 or 6 years of becoming emotionally aware enough and emotionally functional enough to where, and emotionally intelligent enough to where your relationships will really start popping, and it'll be juicy stuff on a regular basis. And there will be a certain amount of ease and love and joy and enjoyment that comes into your life. So this is the invitation that we slide over to you as ITB practitioners and keepers and stewards and we wish you well. And you know where to find us if you have any information about this, or if you have if you have any questions about this material. Go to embodyingitb.org, sign up for a session with one of our coaches, with one of our stewards. You can do those online or in person, and I highly, highly suggest it. This is what we're here for. This is what we're doing. We're not stopping. We're not going anywhere. So please participate. Please hop on. Please jump in. We're here for you, and we're ready to rock with you. So let's do it together, shall we? All right, it's some of the greatest work you'll ever do in your life, and everybody will benefit from it. First and foremost, you. All right, so let's do it together. And like I said, my name is Jeff Koshin West, and I hope to see you along the way. All right, blessings to you. Be safe, be well, get good rest, eat good food, move your body, dance your ass off, and enjoy being an incredible mess, being the incredible mess that you are. All right, welcome to being human. All right. Till next time, I'll see you later.